Is it all right if I get started? Okay, so this morning we are in John chapter 19. If you have been with us or you have been reading this in your free time, we've been spending quite a bit of time dealing with Jesus' betrayal, with his being led into an illegal trial. We've been talking the last couple of weeks about that particular trial and how unusual it was. Now, Jerry wasn't here. Jerry Dawson asked me, I think it was maybe 3 weeks ago now, maybe 2, about the custom to release a prisoner on the Passover. And I'd mentioned that I had done some research, and of course it was limited research because I checked my library, see what my commentators or what the commentators say that I have, and then I searched the internet, or it might be a different order, but there's, you have to be careful what you find online and what you believe, but I'm confident in what I believe and that I won't be misled, so I usually will use the internet to get to books that I can't otherwise. I mentioned that there's so many people on the internet, so many books, in fact, that have been written even for a long time ago about this particular thing. And there are many people who believe that, considering the fact that there's no historical evidence for this particular thing, they believe that this practice was actually not biblical and is one of the things that proves that the Bible is not true. But one thing, I'm not sure why it would need to be mentioned historically for it to be accurate. It might not have been, it might have been a brand new custom. It might have been a custom that somebody wrote about whose work was not, found, or something of that nature. But to believe that would be to say that the Bible is lying, even though some will argue, well, it's just misinterpreted. I don't know how you can misinterpret it. It's very straightforward. The original language is very clear about this. There are people who argue, well, the name Barabbas, or, it should be said, I think some say it should say Jesus Barabbas or something like that, because Barabbas is a name quite like Jesus, or is the same. It's just, I don't think so. And yet, there wasn't enough research for me to find. Most of that research said, well, it's not true, and I just don't believe that. I was talking to John up here before class, and I thought maybe it's possible that the Romans had created this habit, or this Yes, this custom, and that's why we don't have any, because most of those people who say, well, we don't have any record of it, or we don't have a history lesson on it, they're saying, well, it's not there in the Hebrew. It's not found in Hebrew works. But if it was a Roman custom, it could have been in their works, and it just wasn't, revealed. Then again, Josephus didn't talk about it. And that's as far as I've gone. I reached out to the Brotherhood to the best of my ability, and I'll see what comes back and see what they have to say about it. But I was thinking, in addition to that, I mentioned, I think it was last week when we were talking, maybe it was the week before, when we were talking about Barabbas. And I said there's not really a lot about him in the Bible, but in fact, there are 2 places, I think one in the book of Mark, maybe Matthew, that refers to him as a revolutionary or a rebellion, somebody who might cause rebellion. And then in Luke, he refers to him as a murderer. So there are included biblical illustrations or qualities of Barabbas listed, which I think, again, identifies him as an actual different person than Christ, and suggests that there was sort of a prisoner swap on that day. Now, either way, whether it was a Jewish custom or a Roman custom doesn't really matter. The purpose of it was still the same. It was to appease the people. If they wanted Christ crucified, then Pilate said, okay, because it's your custom, I'll give you an option. In hoping that they would choose the actual evil man, he offered to them Barabbas. Of course, they did not choose that. And I imagine that Pilate was thinking, okay, well, if I decide to go back on my word, the people are not going to respond well to that. Even though he didn't believe Jesus deserved to die, he allowed them, the people, the Jewish people, and anyone else maybe who was gathered there, to get what they want. So they ended up sending him away to be crucified, which is what we've been talking about. Last week we were talking about it. Now, he went through this, what should we call it? A pre-trial to his trial, because now he met with Pilate, met with Herod, but what I'm referring to specifically is how Pilate hoped that he could send Christ away to be scourged, and then once he returned, the people would think that was enough, and then they would let him go. But that is certainly not what happened, as we know. In John chapter 19, verse 4, Pilate said, "I'm bringing him out to you." They said, "We still want you to crucify him." And he said, "I don't think he needs to be, but okay, you can crucify him if you want." Any questions or comments up to that point? We will be getting into verse 14 today, John 19, verse 14. So anything up to that, questions or comments? All righty. John chapter 19, verse 14. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover, and about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Behold," that's Pilate, of course, saying to the Jews, "Behold your king." But they cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Then he delivered him to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus and led him away. Now I think we read a little bit of this, but there are some things we have to talk about. Now once again, we have a reference to the Passover being on that Friday, and it being the preparation day. Now some people think that this refers to, or might think that this refers to the preparing of the Passover meal, or for the Passover meal. But as we examine John chapter 18, the Passover can refer to the lamb, to the meal, or even to the feast of unleavened bread. The Passover meal preparation took place the day before, on Thursday, and at twilight between the two evenings, the paschal lamb would have been killed. That night, which would be the next day according to Jewish time, is when the Passover meal was eaten. So Friday was not the preparation for the Passover meal. It was a preparation for the feast of the unleavened bread, in which all leaven had to be removed from their homes. Now Guy Woods wrote on this, and I'll share with you what he said. He said the preparation day was the day preceding the beginning of the 7 days feast of unleavened bread, Friday. Passover signifies the entire period of the feast, the first day of which was the Sabbath. The 6th hour was 6 a.m. according to Roman reckoning, which John followed, and is in complete harmony with Mark's statement that Jesus was crucified at the 3rd hour. By Jewish computation was about 9 a.m. Under Roman law, sentence could not be pronounced earlier than 6 a.m. It is probable that an hour or so elapsed before the court proceedings were completed and Jesus was delivered up to be crucified. And this painful trip to Calvary was to occur before the crucifixion would begin. And that's where we pick up in verse 17. Any thoughts on that? It's just helping to identify what's being referenced when it's talking about the preparation day, because we don't want to assume something that is incorrect, as we noticed that they came into this area about the time of the Passover, and yet several days transpire since then, and so we have to be accurate, and it helps to understand what the preparation day was in helping us place the days of this feast and the days of these events. This puts us, if you're not aware now, on Thursday night, the day before the crucifixion. Or the preparation day. So anyway, now verse 17. And he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha, where they crucified him and 2 others with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the center. Now John focuses on what Jesus did during this time, but the other accounts give us more information of what happened as Jesus made his way to Golgotha. Jesus started out carrying his cross, but at some point during his journey he could no longer carry it. And we talked about that before, and this was likely due to that scourging that Pilate insisted that he have done, because at that point he was whipped at least 39 times, probably more, which tore his back open, made him very weak from blood loss, and which made it nearly impossible for him to carry that cross. Now Luke 23 verse 27 says, "A great multitude of the people followed him, and women who also mourned and lamented him. But Jesus, turning to them, said, 'Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For indeed the days are coming in which they will say, Blessed are the barren wombs that never bore, and breasts which never nursed. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry? So we'll talk about this a little bit. A great number of people were following Jesus as he made his way outside of the city. The women that followed were beating their chests in grief and wailing for Jesus. Even though he was not strong enough to carry his cross, he managed to speak to them and tell them not to weep for him. Now, let's talk about this grief for a moment. Now, it was customary for mourners or lamenters to be involved in funeral services and things of that nature, but this is prior to Jesus' death, which is interesting to me. Which, I think obviously implies they understood what was about to happen, but there may be more meaning that, we don't see in the scriptures. So he manages to speak to them and tells them not to weep for him. Instead, he wants them to weep for themselves and their children, and even states that those who are barren and have no children will be blessed. That's interesting, right? The reason he is saying this is because Jerusalem would be destroyed and many Jews would lose their lives, as he predicted in Matthew chapter 24. Of course, his prediction came true because starting around AD 66, the Romans began to attack the Jews, and in AD 70, they surrounded the city of Jerusalem for about 5 months. And according to Josephus, starvation became so bad in the city that a woman killed and ate her own baby. Now, verse 31... verse 31 of Luke 23, which said, "For if they do these things in the green wood, what will be done in the dry?" Now, this proverbial expression has been variously interpreted, but it would appear, I think this one is correct. And that is, if they act thus to me, the innocent and the holy, what shall be the fate of these, the guilty and the false? There is here a dramatic prophecy of the destruction of Jerusalem, in which women especially would be deprived and suffer tribulations. The green refers or represents the innocent and holy Savior and the spirituality and vigor of his life. The dry tree represents the morally dead and sapless people, typified by the fig tree blasted by his word 4 days earlier. The fig tree that produces no fruit, if you remember. Thus, by this prophecy, as Jesus left the city for the last time, he prophesied its doom no less than he did upon entering it in Luke chapter 19. Not even the prospect of immediate death took the Savior's mind away from the awful penalties that would fall upon Jerusalem for his rejection, which again just shows the love of God. He's concerned about the outcome. He's concerned about the well-being of these people, the spiritual well-being. The fires of suffering consuming Jesus, the green tree, would be nothing compared with the fires of destruction that would burn up the dead tree, which was Jerusalem, which was judicially and morally dead. And that's from Kaufman's commentary on Luke 23. So Jesus is taken to Golgotha, which is called the place of the skull. No one knows with certainty where this place of execution took place, or where it happened, but many favor a hill located outside the city that looks like a skull. Before he was crucified, he was offered sour wine mingled with gall. Gall is a bitter substance made from wormwood, which was a plant yielding a bitter-tasting dark green oil that is alcoholic in its effect. Mark's account says it was mingled with myrrh, which was a transparent, brown, brittle, odorous substance with bitter taste. Some believe that both of these accounts are talking about the same substance, while others believe that both gall and myrrh were mixed with the sour wine. One thing we know for sure is this drink was designed to help sedate a person so he would have some relief from the pain, but when Jesus tasted it, he refused to drink it because he wanted to endure all the pain that was required in his crucifixion and prior to it. And he was not alone on this day, because 2 unnamed thieves called evildoers by Luke were being crucified as well. These 2 thieves deserved the punishment that they received, but Jesus was innocent. It's hard for me today to picture that image. It's embarrassing. It's so dishonorable to place an innocent man, for one, but the Son of God, the King of all, in a cross between 2 thieves. It shows how little they thought of him. It also shows how seriously the Romans dealt with crime. I mean, if they really were just but thieves, it seems, in my personal opinion, a little extreme. to kill these individuals. Perhaps they were guilty of other things. I don't know. I saw there. We got a lot more notes, but I'm not going to read that. Anybody have any questions or comments they want to add to this?
So the other interesting thing here is the fact that how easily they disregard the truth. If it doesn't fit their plan, they just totally disregard it.
Right.
And that's the sad thing. Is they really had all the information they needed to know who Jesus Christ was. But that didn't make any difference.
Yeah.
They were going to do what they wanted to do. But we also know it happened because that's the scriptures were going to be fulfilled through Jesus Christ.
Right. Yeah. I'm never trying to insinuate that I don't see the value behind what happened with Christ, and knowing that it was a necessary thing, that he endured all that, and that the people who chose to do the things they did or say the things they chose to say, they were involved in that, and it needed to be that way. But if the people that were involved in this, who caused Jesus to be crucified, had remembered the prophecies concerning Christ, I think it would have opened their eyes. I think they would have started thinking, maybe one time a prophecy is fulfilled, that's sort of a coincidence. But 2, 3, 15, 20 times, which Jesus fulfilled hundreds of prophecies, if they had just thought about one or two of those, it might have changed everything. Of course, God knew that it wouldn't, which is why Christ came at that time. But we do think about that. If they had just remembered, they would have changed. It would have changed everything. Yeah, Jerry.
It would seem that the Romans could have chosen an easier, quick death, but that would defeat the purpose of shame, embarrassment, and ridicule, and all that sort of thing. So all these other things added to it would seem to add to the shame rather than just come to get.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder, I do wonder if the Romans just had, if say Pilate, for instance, just had an image to uphold, and that's really the only reason he went through with it. Because they had the power, as Tim, you mentioned, I think that the Romans were clearly worried, like the Egyptians were. I think there was a concern that there were enough Jews that maybe they couldn't wipe out the Roman Empire, but they could definitely try, and they'd cause a lot of lives would be lost, maybe a lot of destroyed property. I think that those kinds of things was a concern. I think maybe Pilate, that was really, it was just about pleasing the people, and that's all it was. He could have chosen a different way, sure. But if the Romans were all about crucifixion, and Pilate decided one day, well, I'm not going to crucify this man that you all believe so fervently deserves to die. Imagine the impact that would have. They're crying out to crucify, and he just says, why don't I just execute him right here, if that's really what you want? There's a lot of things that would play into that, and that could have been one of them. Yep.
It seems kind of counterproductive to murder somebody in such a gruesome way, but then also offer them an analgesic. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I was wondering I had never realized that it was possibly alcoholic in nature. That obviously I agree with the fact that Jesus wanted to suffer everything, but if it was alcoholic in nature, he wouldn't have been permitted to drink it, right? Or was that more like medicinal? Would you say?
Well, he didn't. He refused to drink it.
But was it like an alcoholic beverage, or was it more medical in nature?
It was more medical. It wasn't like they had a wineskin of wine. It might have been mixed in, but it was the other spices and stuff that they put in there that made it that way.
And the other thing was, even in America into the early 1900s, we have public hangings. Public execution was really a way for the government to keep the people in check. You mess around on us, this is what we're going to do. And the people in the crowd, they likely knew that those guys were thieves. You would really think twice before stealing something.
True.
If they were.
Especially if they were crucified, right?
Right, when you think about them doing that. So, I'm always really amused when people say, oh, society is the worst it's ever been. People are just as evil as they've ever been. I'm like, how can you read back in biblical times? These people are so uncivilized and so barbaric. And, obviously there are parts of the world that are still like this today, especially over in the Middle East. They're just crazy.
The people who had no law. The Jews definitely sinned and they made mistakes, but they weren't like the rest, I mean, there were some, obviously, people who were involved in stoning prophets, for instance, that's cruel. But there's always a minority of people who are decent. It's just the world, and I think that the reason why the world is like that is because they don't have a law. I mean, they're uncivilized, they're barbaric because they don't really have a sense of goodness or righteousness without God's law.
Which just goes to further prove why we need a supreme being, because without it, they act like that. You look at the Roman guards and how they treated Jesus. I doubt that was unique. I mean, I'm sure it seems as though those men really found pleasure in torturing Jesus. And it's
Which ones, the Romans?
the guards.
Oh, I think so, yeah, absolutely.
And it just seems, it's just so bizarre to think that people are that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, we're having a conversation up here, but we're talking about, how, the cruelty of men has existed for a long time, and think about the punishment that the Romans put Jesus through. It was a very common practice, and the idea was, of course, to keep the people in check. So that, that could have been another thing, part of the reason why they went through with it, with the slow process of crucifixion instead of a quicker thing. And like Sammy was saying, society, the majority of people who live in society are without law. Their moral standard is their own, and so they do things that they want to do despite the circumstance, despite how it affects themselves or other people, and that's been happening really since the beginning of time, because Adam and Eve did something they were tempted, obviously, but did something without any thought about the consequences. And that's how people have lived ever since then. Not everybody, though, right? Those who crucified Christ, they don't represent humanity. Linda?
Yeah. Last night I was watching a documentary on Holocaust, and talk about inhumanity to humans. It just seemed like there were so many people compared to the 3 on the cross.
Yeah.
And it's just, and it's like they enjoyed it. The guards and they.
It's all about control. Power over somebody else. It really is.
Thousands of people.
How many Jews died? It was 6 million, yeah.
But then there were other people they gave.
Yeah, right. Yeah, lots of people. But here, there's a fundamental reason for that way, for people treating other people that way, and that is a lack of belief in God. And I'll explain it to you the way I've been talking to this guy I've known for years, and it seems like every time we spend months not talking, and then I talk to him, and suddenly he believes something new. And recently, we were talking about evolution. He's talking about the value of animals and how much he loves them, and how terrible people are compared to animals. And I just, casually said, but as great as animals are, I mean, humans are still more important. They're still of greater value, and it concerns me that you don't see that. And actually, that's becoming a bigger and bigger issue these days. People love their animals. We love our cat in a unique, a very specific way. It's not like we love each other. I'm not going to die for Theo, that idiot. He just, he's not worth dying for. And it's not, and it's a cat. You know what I mean? I shouldn't have to feel bad. I'm not going to go out and just take him out. You know what I mean? I'm not Dick. Not Dick McCoy, but Dick Brown back there. He just threatens my cat. But humans are of greater value. And when you look at the scriptures, and God gave us dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the air and the beasts of the field, how can you question that? But what happened with this process of thinking, it's just changed over time, where animals have become basically the same, if not greater than humans. Well, now humanity is being, I'll remind me to get to you. But I saw a video, I remember years ago, of this, I think it was a couple of kids. They lived on a farm and they had a bunch of puppies. And I know that it's very inhumane, and but I've heard it's been a practice where they put all these puppies in a bag because they don't need them, and they'll throw them in the river. Messed up, yeah. I couldn't believe it when I heard that. But this video, she was just taking the puppies out one at a time and just chucking them into the river like they were nothing, and that's messed up. That's not a godly attribute. But yet today, the majority of the world won't blink an eye when a baby is murdered in the womb. We see that absence for love of humanity because there's no God in the lives of people. There's no love of God. They don't experience, they don't knowingly experience the love of God. They do experience it, but they don't know it. So they put God out of their minds, and immediately humans are equal to animals. And that's why millions of Jews were killed. That's why in all of the wars that have ever been had, millions of people have died unnecessarily, because human life is not valued like it once was, or like it was intended to be. God made man in his image. And actually, if you look at the Hebrew language where it says that God breathed into us the breath of life, the suggestion is that's the soul. God didn't breathe into animals the breath of life, but into man. And animals are breathing, they are living, but they're not conscious. They don't have a soul, but men do. And Jesus said, what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world but loses his own soul? But when did he ever say that about animals? In fact, they were told to sacrifice animals. We're told to eat animals, God told Paul, you can eat anything you want to, basically. But I just don't understand it. And it was weird to me that I had to have an argument about men being more valuable than animals. Tim.
The English word gall in the New Testament comes from the Greek word, and I believe it's pronounced chole, C-H-O-L-E. And that comes from Strong's Concordance, which literally means poison. All the Old Testament verses that use this word, Lamentations 3:5, 3:19, Jeremiah 8:14, 9 and 15, 23 and 15, have common definition of something that tastes bitter and is many times poisonous. When they offered that to Christ, and it was Roman practice that criminals, when they were crucified, were often given that mixture. It eased their suffering, but it hastened their death as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Christ's crucifixion is different. He refused to take the easy way out. He prayed in the garden that if it would be God's will to come and pass from it, God's will was that it did not. And so by it not passing from him meant that Jesus didn't take the easy way out, that he fulfilled God's word to the letter, to the period.
Yeah.
And we as the human race should be grateful that Jesus Christ did have the love for us to suffer everything that he suffered. It was almost beyond human endurance, but he suffered that. He knew what they were offering him, and he knew that it could possibly alter his death on the cross.
Yeah. Perhaps it would have been sin if there was alcoholic content, for instance.
He died poisoning on the cross.
It would have been his fault, right? Because then, he didn't drink it. He could have.
But if he had died of poisoning on the cross, it would have altered God's plan. God's plan was that he died physically from the
You're right.
crucifixion itself
Yeah.
for our sin, the suffering that he went through. It may not seem like much, but in God's eyes, God's will is huge.
Yeah.
Well, I did not know that, but now knowing that, thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. If Jesus had drank that and then he had died prior to fulfilling all of the scriptures, that would have been a huge issue. And I think we really see in John there at the end where he says, not stepping on the person on the head, but when he says, it's finished, he's fulfilled the last prophecy.
Yeah.
And then he just gives himself.
Yeah, there are several prophecies that would not have been fulfilled if he had actually consumed that and died from it. Yeah.
It said he bowed his head and yielded up.
Yeah, he gave it up.
They gave up. They didn't take it.
Yeah.
The Roman soldier came with the idea, if he wasn't dead, he was going to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
That spear thrust in his side was to make sure that he was dead, but Christ was already gone. He was already dead. He had yielded up the ghost. He yielded. They didn't take it. God's will was completed.
Yep. It's a powerful passage, and that's just really not something people catch on to, really, is that he yielded up the ghost. And all these things that we're talking about, too, that's the whole point of this class, is you learn the little details that help you understand, more about what they were thinking and why they did this. And
I also heard a conversation online
I just,
He didn't die a silly, weak, screaming death.
yeah.
He was in control of his death. He yielded up the ghost. And he spoke to people from the cross. So if he was speaking to people from the cross, he certainly wasn't screaming like a schoolgirl. You know, our world today just doesn't, there's very little respect anymore for what Christ suffered.
Well, a lot of people treat it like make-believe. It's just a story.
I'm just appalled when I hear that kind of thing.
I'm appalled by most of what I hear in the world. Because I'm a preacher, I talk to a lot of people, and I mean, as a Christian, just as a Christian, if I wasn't a preacher, I'd do the same thing. It might be harder, but I mentioned in our Bible class Wednesday, actually, that one of the big reasons why those kind of classes are necessary is because it gives us boldness, which is required for preaching the gospel. And the reason why I can walk up to people who are walking over to my door who don't want to talk to me, but rather would just put paper on my door, that's why I'll run up to them, because I have boldness. And today, there's not a lot of boldness. There's not a lot of the gospel being preached. And then what is filling that void is then people who are anti-gospel. We also talked about Wednesday about how there are so many different ways for you to be manipulated by the world into believing what the world believes. And if we've not built up a defense for ourselves by knowing the truth well enough, we're doomed to be drug right into it. And that's a big concern, because there is no respect for God in most of the world today, and you know, it just continues to increase.
You know, just two quick points. Number one is Pilate did everything he possibly could to get out of this. He wanted no part of it.
Well,
He said, "I gave him
now if you're saying that, we could argue that he could just put it into it. I mean, he literally could just put it into it.
Okay, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is he tried to convince the people.
Yeah.
I find no fault in him, okay? But he said, okay, you go with it and do what you want to. Now, he could have stopped, you're right, I won't argue that. Number two is the fact that what happened after the crucifixion, and I can't find it real quick in here, but there was a comment made, right? This truly is
Yes.
the Son of God. But they had to kill him before they come to that realization. Isn't that
No.
sad? Isn't that sad?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, it's very sad. But how much did they actually believe it? Maybe they were just like, whoa, this couldn't happen unless he was the Son of God, or did they truly believe? I mean, there's a big difference, right?
You're right. I don't know that, but I'm
Yeah.
just saying.
Well, I know you don't know.
Those two things came to my attention.
Yeah.
Okay? It's just that someone realized who he really was after they killed him.
Yeah.
And that's just, you know.
Sin is that way. We never see the ugliness of sin
Yeah.
until after the fact. That's Satan. One of Satan's best tools is to disguise it. And I agree with what Dick was saying. It's a shame that they couldn't recognize it before.
Yeah.
But again, it goes back to
It had to happen.
God's will.
Yeah.
And it was at the right time when God decided that was the pathway to the cross. It was God's will. It couldn't be stopped.
But we truly need to be grateful to our Lord and Savior for that. We need to honor him and worship him and show that to him, that we truly do believe who he was and what he did. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have a chance to see him again someday. And we truly need to do the best we can in our lives to make that known.
Yeah, and I think if we should study the entirety of the Bible, but if we focus a lot of our attention on the cruelty that Christ endured, you know, just so that we would have an opportunity to say, read the Bible and have it mean something, right? If I read the Bible and put it into practice, it means something, but not if Christ didn't go through with what he went through. And he had to endure those things. It's not like he could have taken the easy way out, like we were just talking about. He could have taken the easy way out, drank this poison or whatever it was, and then just died that way, but he didn't. He endured it all. He fulfilled all the prophecies. And I think remembering the details of his crucifixion really should help us understand what we owe him. Because, I mean, who here has endured anything like that? Not me.
Many of the older folks here in the congregation probably can remember being corrected by their parents with a switch.
Yeah, I mean, I was corrected with a belt.
Anybody agree?
and a paddle,
Yeah.
and a broom.
I remember a switch. My mom would.
I was fortunate. I never got the switch, I don't think.
My mom raised 4 orphan boys.
I say I'm fortunate. Did you hear me say that? I've been hit with so many things.
She would make us go out and cut her own switch.
Yeah.
It not only wasn't physical, it was psychological.
Right, yeah. You know what's going to happen.
It wasn't often that when you were corrected that way that you said, I believe I'm going to do that again.
Right, yeah.
It was, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to do that again.
Well, we now know what happened. I'm telling you what happened.
But the correction with a switch is nothing to what the Romans did to Jesus Christ.
Absolutely.
And for that, I am grateful.
And what is he preventing us from enduring? That's another thing that we should consider when thinking about what he endured to prevent it.
Who am I that you use my name?
Yep, that's what Job said, right? It was Job. Yep. And we're all just like Job too, really. We're all made of flesh. We all endure suffering. We all lose things, but we all have much to gain. But we have to put our trust in God. And that's the thing. It's just, I don't know. The world views it to be way more complicated than it is. It requires too much, and therefore it's not worth it. But it is. Now I wanted to, and I often will share details like this. And we have a few. I want to read a little bit of this at least here about the crucifixion and some other things. When the Romans conquered Palestine, they continued the use of this form of punishment, but only in the case of slaves and most vicious criminals. Thus, crucifixion carried with it a stigma. It was a part of the humiliation of Jesus that he should be made to suffer this particular form of death. It identified him with the lowest class of criminals. Crucifixion was an unspeakably horrible means of death. Cicero, in condemning it, said, "Let it never come near the body of a Roman citizen, nay, not even near his thoughts or his eyes or his ears." Victims of crucifixion were suspended on a cross placed well above the ground. It consisted of 2 rough beams or logs nailed together near the top of the upright beam, which was placed in the ground. The victim was usually stripped of all clothing, these garments falling to the lot of the executioners. The upright was placed securely in the earth, standing some 10 feet above the ground. The horizontal beam was placed on the ground. The victim was laid down with arms outstretched on this crossbar, to which they were fastened with cords and then afterwards by nails driven through the palms. The bar was then raised to its appointed place near the top of the upright, where it was securely fastened. The body of the victim was left suspended by the arms. The feet were then fastened to the upright by the use of long spikes driven through the balls of the feet. Thus suspended, the victim was left to hang in physical agony until death mercifully released them from suffering. Since no vital organs were affected the poor victim lingered. Since no vital organs were affected, the poor victim lingered in the throes of the most excruciating pain. Death came slowly. The victim often lived as long as 2 or 3 full days. Throbbing with pain, burned with fever, and tortured by thirst, these unfortunate men often prayed for the relief which only death could furnish. Now, when you think about Christ and you think about crucifixion, what he endured was even worse than what the normal crucifixion was like. And I think it's proven by 2 things. First of all, the trial, the distress, plus the physical beating that Jesus took beforehand. He did a lot of bleeding before he even got to the cross. And I'm not saying that was totally different than what normally would go on, but for Christ it was unique. And remember too that many times they would live for several days, but Christ didn't make it through the first because of what he endured. I may not have time, but furthermore, the driven nail, well, there's more here. Let's see. The first thing they would do to Jesus was throw him down on his back and stretch his arms out on the crossbeam. While this was happening, dirt would be getting into his open wounds on his back, making his back hurt even more. based on a crucified body dating around the 1st century that was found in an ossuary near Jerusalem. The nails that were used were about 5 to 7 inches long, and they were tapered iron spikes with a square shaft of about 3/8 of an inch across. They would drive these tapered spikes to the hands of Jesus, and while we do not know if they ran the spike through his palm or his wrist, both were considered part of the hand. Based on the evidence we have today, the spike was probably driven through the wrist because the ligaments are strong enough to hold the weight of a person, but a spike through the palm would almost always tear the hand. A spike driven through the wrist would cause even more intense pain to the victim, and according to a physician, the driven nail would crush or sever the rather large sensory motor medium. We'll read the rest of that, and I will learn that word. Thank you. But we're going to get into our worship service, and we're going to be taking the Lord's Supper and communing in that way. Remember these details. It will help draw you to the cross and the agony that he endured instead of anything that might be distracting you.